Well, hello everyone and welcome to the midweek roundup here on RaceWeek, where we will also be previewing, where we'll be looking at what happened in the Styrian Grand Prix in detail, and also we will be previewing the Hungarian Grand Prix this weekend, which will be the third round of this year's Formula 1 season. So, like last week, today I will be first going through the news, and then I will be analysing some of the events from last week's Styrian Grand Prix at the Red Bull Ring, and then after that I will be previewing the Hungarian Grand Prix, which takes place this weekend in Budapest. So, let's go into the news. And the first bit of news, one of the big stories, in fact, both big stories this weekend have been this week since the Styrian Grand Prix have been about Racing Point, or revolving around Racing Point. So let's talk about the news. Wrong bit. The first big story is regarding Sebastian Vettel potentially moving to Racing Point next year, and there have been a lot of rumours. Obviously, as we all know, Sebastian Vettel will not be driving for Ferrari next year. He was dropped by the team, told that they didn't need his services. I mean, that personally surprised me, because I thought that Ferrari wanted him for next year. So I actually originally thought the decision was more his than Ferrari's. But then this is where it gets really complicated. Racing Point have two contracted drivers in the form of Sergio Perez and Lance Stroll. Sergio Perez says he's had offers from other teams, so there is credibility to these rumours that are really gathering pace. So I believe that there is quite a chance that we could see Sebastian Vettel in a Racing Point, or what will then be an Aston Martin next year. So it's going to be interesting to see if this actually happens. But the interesting thing is what happens to their two existing drivers. They're both contracted for next year. Now, we don't know what the terms and conditions of the contract is, but they are contracted for next year. And now the big talk has been about Sergio Perez, because a lot of people are assuming they are not going to want to get rid of Lance Stroll, considering that his dad basically owns the team. And for me, that is going to be really, really, really harsh on Sergio Perez, who has found a really good home at this team. He has been at the team since 2014 and had so much success, such as he's scored many podiums for the team. And also, you need to not forget that in the administration period, he saved the team in 2018 because he put the team in administration to fend off a wind-up claim which would have shut down the team. So you can basically say if it wasn't for him, the team wouldn't be here. So it is quite unbelievable that they might get to a point where they will be sacking a driver that has been through so much with them, has been with the team. This is his 7th year with the team now, has been with the team for 7 years. It would be quite a bit of a shock story. Of course, it's not surprising that they want to go for a 4-time world champion, but it would be it would be seen. I don't think it's going to be that much of a popular decision if Sergio Perez ends up getting the boot. In fact, someone, I believe the Mexican Prime Minister, I think it might have been, actually, or someone very key in Mexico, actually has started a Twitter hashtag, Keep Checo. So, obviously, he's a very popular driver, and he did drive very well up until that. The fact that this comes straight after one of his great drives really increases the shock a bit more. It would be really sad to see Perez get booted from this team, especially as it looks like his patience in the team might pay off now that they're becoming a factory team. But here's where the interest may lie as well. I personally think that, of course, Lawrence Stroll is going to be fighting hard to keep his son in the team. But there are probably a lot of executives of Aston Martin and a lot of the brands as well that will say they want Perez to stay. I mean, Vettel and Perez would be a strong lineup, it would be good for the brand to have a lineup like that. Two proven, capable drivers. I'm not saying Lance Stroll's bad, but I think a lot of people high up will want Sergio Perez, will prefer to have Sergio Perez over Lance Stroll. But it depends on if this could be a real test about Lawrence Stroll. If he gives in to that and says, "Oh, all right, then we'll have Sergio. I'll try and find somewhere else for Lance to go." If he gives in, then that will show that Lawrence Stroll is in there because he wants to run an F1 team. But if he doesn't, that could show he's only. There were people suggesting that could show that he's only running the team to give his son a drive. So this could be a real test for Lawrence Stroll, but obviously he is going to be fighting to keep Lance Stroll in the car. I think there could be quite some internal battles at the team, because, as I said, a lot will be wanting Sergio Perez to stay. A lot of people high up will want Sergio to stay. But obviously Stroll's company will want Lance to stay. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out, and I'm not sure that we're going to get an announcement on that as to which one will get the boot for a while. There's going to be a lot of internal arguments. I can say that. But now on to the next piece of news, and this was on the day of the Styrian Grand Prix in the evening after the race had finished. Renault launching a protest against Racing Point. I believe the brake duct was said to be too similar to the Mercedes, and also they're protesting the car. I believe they're protesting the car in general for being, because of course, I'm pretty sure you're all aware of the controversy with regards to Racing Point, in the fact that their car is inspired by the Mercedes, and they have openly admitted that their car is inspired. But a lot of people are saying their car is too similar to last year's Mercedes, going as far as even calling it the pink Mercedes. It's going to be, and they're doing a protest about it. So, firstly, I need to actually voice what I'm going to say about this. Copying other teams is far from new to Formula 1. Yes, I mean, I'm kind of stating the obvious here, but it's been this. But this has been happening in Formula One since its inception. It is why teams go through so much effort to hide their designs, because they don't want other teams to copy them. And Racing Point seem to have not actually broken any rules. I mean, the FIA have already checked. But the thing is, if Renault wouldn't be doing this protest if they didn't feel that they had a legit reason to protest. So clearly they have seen something. Something that they don't like. And what that's going to mean, I don't know. But firstly, let's actually compare the Racing Point to the 2019 Mercedes. I know it's very cheap what I've done, going into F1 2020 and F1 2019 to compare the two cars, but it's the best I can do to avoid copyright. So, here you have the 2020 Racing Point on the screen. Now, as you can see, it's a striking, for people who recognise the shapes very well, it's a striking resemblance to the 2019 Mercedes. And as you see, there are a lot of similarities between the two cars. But one thing that I have noticed, looking at real life pictures and also looking at this, you have to bear in mind that this could be an older version of the last year's Mercedes as well. But there are distinct differences between the two, which were noticed on pictures as well. The biggest difference that I can notice is the whole engine cover sidepod area. That is different. That is very different. See, the last year's Mercedes had a lot more distinct curves to it. It kind of had, not really sure how to describe it, an extra sidepod at the front of it. An extra bulge at the front of the sidepod. The way it kind of bulges out. That's not present on the Racing Point. The Racing Point is a more conventional, smooth sidepod compared to the Mercedes. And that goes up to the engine cover as well. The engine cover is a bit more similar, but it's a lot larger on the Racing Point. And other things that have to be noted, there are a lot of differences at the rear of the car. As you can see, the Racing Point here, this is the Racing Point that you've got on screen now. The rear wing is a lot bigger on the Racing Point. I mean, may have been a different camera angle as well, but there are a lot of differences in the diffuser as well. And then the front of the car is obviously probably the most striking resemblance to the Mercedes that there is, and it's probably what has raised so much eyebrows, the fact that the front of the car is the same. But even then, there are differences. So now, comparing the two side by side, there are two very similar cars, but for me, it's no more similar to the Mercedes than the Haas has been to the Ferrari for many, many years. Basically, since they started entering F1. It is weird that Haas didn't get any protests in 2018. But, as I've said, copying others in F1 has been happening since its inception. And the other interesting thing is, as a lot of people are stating, most notably WTF1, it's one thing, it's very hard to copy a design and be successful with it, because you're using a completely different design that you don't understand. Part of the reason that Racing Point have come under so much scrutiny for it is because they've made it work. When you compare it to the Haas situation, Haas haven't managed to make that Ferrari resemblant chassis work as well. Struggle to understand the tyres, and they haven't managed to make it work. whereas Racing Point have. It is one thing, as I said, it's one thing copying a design or being inspired by that philosophy, and it's another thing making it work and understanding it. And Racing Point clearly have understood it well. So that is the news. And now let's go into the analysis of certain things that happened in the Austrian Grand Prix last week. In the Styrian Grand Prix last week. So, taking a look at, analysing some of the events that have happened. Need to get to this. I don't know why it's kind of, I don't know why it's not starting at the beginning like it's supposed to, but here you go. I've got to get back. This is where I'm going to go. So for the first thing I am going to analyse from the Styrian Grand Prix is that incident at the start. The two Ferraris come together. And the common opinion was that the clerk is to blame. Even the clerk himself put the blame on himself. And I can kind of see that. So first, going into the corner, as you can see, he is behind, I believe that's Kevin Magnussen, and obviously there's Sebastian Vettel ahead. This is breaking into the Remus curve, and then a gap opens up on the inside. Now, at the time, I thought it was normal that he was going to go in there, and I still believe that it's kind of racer's instinct. When you see a gap like that, you go in. But he obviously did not account for other cars being on the outside, and then you can see the clerk then knows what's going to happen. He does try to avoid the contact here by going as much onto the curb as he can, but he can't quite manage, and the contact is still made. So this is from Vettel's perspective, and this is why Vettel could not avoid it. As you can see, he's got Williams on the inside, I believe that's George Russell. Racing Point on the outside, not sure which one of those it is. Going into the corner, they're ahead, but he's now got Kevin Magnussen on the outside, heading into the Remus. And it's at this moment that I believe the contact has just been made. And as you can see, he is desperately trying to avoid hitting Kevin Magnussen. There was almost contact there. And Kevin Magnussen then actually in the end had to go off the track. But this is probably the best angle of the incident. Going into the Remus curve, as you can see, Leclerc is right behind Vettel. Going into the corner, as you can see, he sees that gap on the inside, but you can see Vettel couldn't really leave much more space than he did. And then Leclerc gets his way into the gap. The contact is made, and then Vettel's rear wing is taken off. So, I don't disagree that Leclerc was at fault. I believe that he was entitled to go into that space that he went into, but he maybe should have gone in there a bit more carefully. One thing that I have to mention, rustiness. Still, it's the first race back after a long gap, so rustiness still may have shown, which could have potentially contributed to this accident. But that is how I believe that is that incident. So now, on to later in the race, because not really much happened in between around lap 5 and lap 65. And then you had the Verstappen and Bottas incident. So as you can see, this is on board with Bottas going into the corner. He attempts a pass around the outside, but Verstappen covers the inside line. Bear in mind, Verstappen has damage to his front wing at this point. But at this point, Bottas does get the advantage of DRS, and he manages to draft past. But this was amazing from Max Verstappen. One of the best overtakes he's done. He switches back to the outside, brakes late with that damaged front wing, and fights his way back round the outside, and he somehow manages to make it work. He gets really good drive off the corner, and he has the high ground going into turn 5, and he get on turn 6, and he takes the position, back the position. I mean, unfortunately, it didn't last, but was a great piece of driving from Verstappen. Now on to analysing the final lap. Analysing the final lap. Going into the Remus curve, as you can see, this is the final lap. As you can see, Stroll. This might actually be a replay of the penultimate lap. I'm not sure if this. Yeah, this is the penultimate lap, isn't it? You can see Stroll goes for a move. He brakes too late, and then both he and Ricciardo go wide. This allows Lando Norris to get in on the act, and he is able to get past Ricciardo. He then eventually manages to get past Stroll, and then he gets past Perez after he lost his front wing. So that's the analysis. Now on to the weekend in hand. The Hungarian Grand Prix. And now here, I am going to take you through a lap of... Let's have a look at the track. So, looking at the track map, as you can see, the layout, it's a very short lap around the Hungaroring. The track starts on the on this long straight, and then into the first corner, which is probably the best overtaking point on the track, in towards turn 2. Then the track goes into turn 3. Then you go into a very fast left-hander of turn 4, into the long right-hander at turn 5, then into the chicane at turn 6 and 7. Then you have, this is the fast part of the track, you have 2 chicanes in the middle of the track. Particularly turn 11 is very fast, turn 10 and 11 is very fast. Then into turn 12 you have a braking zone. Then you have 2 long corners. Firstly, a left-hander and then a right-hander, which completes the lap of the Hungaroring. This track has produced some good racing in the past. It's produced some good racing in the past. And now, let's take a look at a video lap around the track. So, taking you around a lap of the Hungaroring on the pit straight. This is the DRS zone. A slight downhill run into the first corner. A heavy braking zone. There's trouble here. Has been trouble here in the past, but it's a heavy braking zone and the best overtaking point. Then you go further down the hill, up towards the long left-hander at turn 3. Then you go into turn 3, which is flat out. And then you go into the very hit and miss, very fast turn 4. Then into the long right-hander at turn 5. And then you're onto the brakes into the chicane at turn 6 and 7. You have to avoid the high curves. You have to avoid the high curves on the inside of both corners. Then you have the chicanes that I was talking about. The first of the 2 chicanes, you have to really ride the curves, but it's a lot slower. Then you go into a flat. And then the right-hander at turn 13 is very fast, only a slight lift off. Then you go into the heavy braking zone at turn 14. Then you go into the long left-hander at turn 15. And then in these last 2 corners you see different lines, especially when you need to do an overtake. Turn 16 is the final corner, and now back onto the main straight. It's a very short lap around this track, and that is a lap around the Hungaroring. And now, let's have a look at the team. Let's go through it, previewing it, team by team, in reverse constructors order for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Has had a very dismal weekend last week, and they'll be hoping to improve this weekend. But as I said, it is a long road ahead of them, and I don't really see how this weekend is going to be any different, going with all the I don't see it how it's going to be any different for them, because their issues are far from solved. Especially if this is a track which could punish them a bit more for the issues. Next up, we have Williams. And last year, this was where George Russell got his, I believe, his best qualifying of the season. So if their car is similarly good on tracks like this, consider them similarly better at tracks like this, then this could be a good weekend, especially on a track that's hard to overtake on. If you qualify as well, if any of them qualify well, they could get a good result, good Williams. Also, it's interesting to note that today they confirmed that both their drivers will be remaining with the team for 2021 in the form of both George Russell and Nicholas Latifi. So talking about Alfa Romeo, and they again lacked pace last week at the Red Bull Ring, but they did finish this one place off the points with Kimi Raikkonen. Now Alfa Romeo had a kind of a mixed weekend here last year, but their car does lack pace here. Their car does lack pace this year. It's not as good, so I'm expecting more of the same for them. Next up, AlphaTauri, and again, I can kind of see it being a similar story for them, on the outskirts of the points, but not really challenging for the top half of the points. But they are proving to be a solid midfield team this year, are AlphaTauri. Well, last week was more of the same as the week before. Good pace, poor reliability for Renault. If they can get both cars to the finish, then it could be a good weekend for them. But, has to be said, they did struggle a bit here last year. Both cars finishing out of the points. I have to remember, it is actually a fairly similar car to last year, other than the nose. So, I could see it being more of the same, but the car has shown steps forward, so we could see them being quicker than they were last year. But we'll have to wait and see what this weekend holds for them. And next up we have Ferrari. Well, what can be said for them after an absolutely dismal weekend for the team last week? It'll be interesting to see if now they're expected to have the full updates, but they say it should show the full potential of this car. I think it's going to be a nerve-wracking weekend for Ferrari fans this weekend, because if this weekend the updates don't work as expected, it could be a very rocky road for them indeed. And these problems are not going to be an easy fix. I mean, I do believe that they will get on top of the problems, but if it's not fixed this weekend, we can safely say that they're not going far this year, most likely. Especially in a condensed season where it's going to be hard. Where it's going to be hard to do any kind of improvements to the car and really develop it. And it also would be bleak for 2021 as well. So this is a big weekend for Ferrari. Next up we have Racing Point. Now, once again it was a case of good but could have been better last week. Their solid pace was ruined by poor qualifying. It was really scuppered by poor qualifying. But it'll be interesting to see if the car is as quick at Hungary as it has been so far, because this has typically been a weaker track for them, the Hungaroring. Doesn't really play to the strengths. But this car does have more downforce than previously, so it may not be as much of a deficit to usual as normal for Racing Point. Next up we have Red Bull, who've had a disappointing start to the year. But this track, they say, could be a real indicator as to whether this car really can take the fight to the Mercedes. It was here Max Verstappen got pole last year, and the only reason he didn't win was because of a masterstroke strategy from the Mercedes team. So this will be a big test. This car, we know, is good, but is it good enough to regularly challenge the Mercedes? We'll have to wait and see. This weekend could really be an indicator as to whether that's the case. On to McLaren. Now, what a start to the year that they have had, with two very solid results, including a podium. Will they keep that pace this weekend? McLaren didn't show as much. They did show some pace last year, but will they show as much pace there as they have in Austria? Because if they do, that would bode really well for them going forward, and it would show that they have a good car on all tracks. So McLaren fans would have something to celebrate if McLaren continue to show this pace this weekend in Hungary. And finally, we have Mercedes. And as I said, it would be crucial to see if Red Bull can challenge them. This will be crucial to see if they can maintain that really strong pace that they've had so far this year. And if we are set for a dominant year for Mercedes. If they're quick this weekend, that's going to be very ominous for the rest of the field. Now, I am expecting them. They obviously are going to be contenders to win the race, obviously. But will they be still far ahead of Red Bull? We'll have to wait and see. Because if they are, that will really show that they will be hard to beat once again this year. And that is a team-by-team preview. Now, we also have the Formula 2 and Formula 3 series supporting this race this weekend. So, let's have a look at let's preview the Formula 2 race weekend. So, moving on to the Formula 2 series. Now, I'm just going to get a picture up. And it's been an interesting season so far. We've seen some really exciting racing which currently sees Robert Schwartzman lead the drivers' standings by 5 points back to Christian Lundgaard and Callum Ilott, who are level on points in second and third. And now it's the first time they go to a different track. The Hungaroring has typically seen exciting racing in Formula 2. Has typically seen some and last year was no exception, as we saw Mick Schumacher take his maiden win in the second race. Nicholas Latifi beat out Nick De Vries in the first race. And an interesting fact that needs to be noted, I believe that last year was where this race last year in Formula 3 was where championship leader Robert Schwartzman had his worst race of the season. He retired after contact with Felipe Drugovich, and it was his only retirement, and actually his only finish outside of the points all season. And he didn't show the pace that he did. Now that could play on his mind that this was his weaker track last year. But, and interestingly, it was his rival in the championship, Christian Lundgaard, one of his closest challengers, Christian Lundgaard, who won that the first Formula 3 race last year. The fastest driver who in the feature race, finishing in the feature race last year that's on this grid, is Jack Aitken. But him and Luca Giotto, who's also behind, seem to be struggling a little bit against these rookies. So it's going to be interesting to see. Marcus Armstrong also showed really strong pace in the Formula 3. So I have a feeling that he could be someone to beat this weekend. But I believe that we are going to see more of the season is going to start to take a bit more shape this weekend. We start to see who can realistically challenge for this title. Now we go to a different track. And now we move on to Formula 3. And this is going to be hard to predict after seeing as most of these drivers did not race here last year at this track, considering the high percentage of rookies that we have in this field here in 2020. But looking at the championship standings, it's Oscar Piastri who leads the standings by 6.5 points back to Frederick Vesti in second. Logan Sargent is in third. But I'm expecting the pecking order to be fairly similar, but I'm expecting some of the other rookies that kind of struggled in Austria, such as Pourchaire, despite his win, the likes of Enzo Fittipaldi, Dennis Hauger, Enam Ahmed, to be quite a bit faster this weekend, now they've got more experience with the car. But also watch out for David Beckman as well, because this was the race that he moved to Trident in 2018 and found himself, and this is a good track for him. But it is very hard to predict this Formula 3 weekend. But I'm expecting it to be the usual suspects, but with some of the other rookies that struggled in the first race to be more up there. So it is time to conclude this preview program. But before this happens, before I wrap up, make sure to follow RaceWeek on Twitter. I've just created a new Twitter account which will be used to have more live coverage for the races this year. So this is the RaceWeek Twitter account. Make sure you follow. Give it a follow to have more live updates ahead of the season. We've got more stuff coming in the pipeline, more social media, more websites, perhaps a website, more stuff in the pipeline. Remember, we are just starting out right now, but we've got the Twitter account, which you can follow now. Make sure you do so. And of course, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you tomorrow for the Friday recap, which will be live streamed as soon as all the track action from tomorrow has finished. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.